We had a 5-hour workshop on Friday, and we'll try to condense it to somewhat down to 45 minutes. And so obviously we won't be that successful. So we encourage you to look on YouTube to look for any areas that you might be interested in. This is the 4th year we've been running our Odyssey Developers Conference. It really is a celebration of all of the developers and all their contributions they're providing to helping drive the Odyssey community forward. I wanted to really thank our organizers who helped plan this conference. We look at the annual meetings, all wherever they're at. And we also look at all of our online showcases for software, and we look towards a lot of our maintainers of a lot of our software to look for what's new this year, what's important changes have made, what are things that we want to highlight for our audience. And so this year it was no exception. We had a lot of fun. What was really exciting, one of our themes this year really was about science. Science, the code of science is open science. And really, open source has been so fundamental to how we deliver science and how we can make our scientific research transparent. It can make it accessible. It helps us break down barriers where people might not have resources to get access to the software they need. And it allows us to make our discoveries reproducible for both our scientific community and for society as a whole. So we see open source as really one of the foundational pillars, one of the 4 pillars of the Odyssey community. And so something that we really want to make sure that is thriving and we're supporting it effectively. So let's first talk about our Odyssey software ecosystem. Here's the way that I like to look at it. I like to look at it like a big coral reef. And I think at the base of that coral reef is our OMOP common data model that we've been making slow iterations on for the past 12 years. And I find this is really important to have a stable base. It's really important for us to be able to make software through that model and to be able to then try things out. So that model has really become at the heart of almost all of our repositories that are either using the data or doing data analysis or pushing data into the model. And so the data model is really a critical component, but it also still gets a lot of work. It's one of our most active repos. And so they're still doing a ton of work on the common data model, trying to evaluate new extensions and trying to help with documentation and moving the community forward. And on top of that is our Odyssey vocabulary, which is also one of our other most frequented and heavily utilized and contributed to part of our open source ecosystem. As you know, we have now over 150 clinical terminologies, and that part is not so hard. The hard part is actually trying to harmonize them where this SNOMED code is similar to this ICD-10 code versus across all of these terminologies. So this is really an immense body of work that's been done by a large number of folks within our community, and this sets the stage. The data model provides us the way to make a simple query that can help use the vocabulary, but we can scale very highly with the vocabulary that we have. And so within this ecosystem, I have 3 different, I guess, groups of types of software development. There's a lot of people who are into data management, and that's usually getting data into the OMOP CDM. Could be our data ops groups and data engineering that are using some of the newer tools like Databricks or DBT. This could be our White Rabbit and Rabbit in the Hat family of tools and Usagi that are helping people do the concept mapping. But often they're focused on really how do we get data in, how do we build reliable provenance back to the source data systems that are being used. We have another group that are focusing on how can we do data analysis. These are the groups that are doing prediction, that are doing all kinds of visualization, that are doing all kinds of things of how do we actually look at this data, how do we perform data quality tests on it, and how do we perform analysis. There's a very large school of fish that might look like one fish, but is actually more like 50 different fish that swim in unison with each other. And this is the Hades working group, the Health Analytics Data Evidence Suite. And this group really has built such a great governance within their community where they coordinate their releases, They have standardized their testing, and so they really are trying to make this a core part so that we can use Hades wherever we go. And then the last big group is really the Atlas group, and that is our ability to try to build a website that has a low-code environment where people can get access to the data model. They can do their phenotype development and cohort discovery, as well as perform data characterization, treatment pathways, patient prediction, causal effect analysis, propensity scoring, you name it. And so these are all really important groups. And what's really exciting to see is these groups are each growing, and we're seeing new groups added each year. So here I wanted to give just some of the tallies for what's been going on in our OHDSI repository. And so what we do is GitHub is our main place where we submit software, where we make changes to software, where we put in issues about new features that we want, and then we try to merge. We make branches on that software, and then we try to merge those changes back into the main repository. This is how we do software development as a modern task of a group of people that are working collaboratively across the globe. And so this is GitHub is really an amazing platform, and we also can pull a lot of data. We know who is submitting. We often know what their changes are, so we can always go back and undo the changes, and so we can really get a sense of the natural history of software development within the OHDSI community over the past 12 years. So starting from 2012 to 2024, we started at the beginning or in March a year ago with about 284 repositories. And over the past year, we have added almost 40 new repositories. And each repository is like a new experiment, looking at new technology, looking at the data in new ways, trying out new things. And so there really are really important experiments that we run across the community to find ways to create value for the whole ecosystem. About a quarter to a third of these repos, about 80 of them or so, are really important that we like to have running wherever we do a network study. So Hades is an important piece of running a network study, and Strategos, and having Atlas and the tools around it to be able to visualize the data. And so we've done work on trying to build sustainable, standardized, and a little bit more, I guess, secure software that we can be able to have on a regular release. And we do this through our Docker container of Broadsea. So this is great. So if you look at 280 divided by 12 or so, we're seeing about 20 new repos a year. So I would say since we saw 40 this year, we're not just growing, but we're accelerating in the rate of growth that we're doing. So this is exciting to see all these new experiments. I think one of the most important things for me is how many different people are committing software to our OHDSI repo. Now, there's a lot of OHDSI software development that's not being done inside the OHDSI organization, and we have no way of tracking that. But we can just track the software that's in the OHDSI organization, and we see new repositories and new developers, and so we can track this rate. And so you've seen from over 12 years, we've seen about about 40 or 50 new people a year in terms of software developers. But last year was a banner year, and we had over 156 new people added as developers into our community working on the repositories. This is really exciting to me because this is also an accelerating number. And with the numbers of people who are writing code, we also need to have a larger community of folks who are willing to submit issues, that are using our software and finding new features or asking for new requests or finding bugs in the process. And those are our issue submitters, which are also growing. And then, of course, with a growing number of issue submitters, we also have a growing number of issues submitted. And so what's interesting is, you're seeing that we're seeing about 20% of all issues submitted have been done within the last year. So we're really seeing this growth of the use of GitHub as a medium for us to collaborate with in our endeavors. And then commits are how many times we make a software change within one of those repos, and that number is also accelerating as well. So we're really happy. I think the community is thriving, and we're really trying to find ways to better support it. But this has really been it's been exciting to see this year this type of growth within the Odyssey community. I wanted to mention a couple things. One is why should you consider contributing to open source? Why do developers do this? And so the first, why do people volunteer their time? Why do volunteers contribute to open source? And the answer is there's many reasons. The first is this is actually a great way for folks to learn new technology. They can actually work on the brand new and the latest technologies and the new techniques, whether it's large language models or deep learning or new statistical methods. This is really where you can hone your skills. And so this has been a great place for skill development. It's also, of course, where we can see the difference in what we do. Your code gets used by other people. We see a lot of network studies being run. We see a lot of users downloading the software as well as using it. So it's really exciting to be in an environment where when you make a contribution, that code is now running somewhere else and people are getting value out of that. And that's really an exciting thing for developers. And also being part of our community. It's really important for them to be connected to like-minded people. That's how we grow and how we learn and how we mentor. And so it's really nice to be part of GitHub. It's also part of our professional reputation. So if you think about software developers, usually your GitHub handle is generally your CV. Because it basically tells you what software package you've been working on. It tells you what you've been doing in those packages, what software languages you like. And so it actually is a really important tool to show off what you can do as a professional. And recruiters use GitHub heavily as trying to find people with the technical skills needed for certain upcoming projects. And so I think that's really exciting, and it's exciting to see so many volunteers within our Odyssey community. However, there's only a certain limit that people can spend hours of the day. And what they also might want to find is they might want to find a company that they can work for that will pay them to help do this full time. And so this is what's exciting stuff. The question we've been working on as a community is how do we fund open source development here within Odyssey? And as you can see on the right-hand side, these are some of the organizations that have contributed heavily to the Odyssey ecosystem over the past year. And so the questions are, how are they able to do this? And the answers are, well, our industry partners are using this software, and they need to be able to collect this data. And so this is actually something that helps them do providing joint development efforts so that they don't have to fork the software, develop it on their own, and then maintain it all that by themselves. This provides them a way of retaining professionals and recruiting professionals and lowering the total cost of ownership of the software. We also see a lot of grants. So you'll see groups like Erasmus MC, which is the medical center in Belgium, and they have done a tremendous amount of work with the Darwin Initiative and the Eden initiatives. And so we see other groups like the NIH with All of Us. We've seen the CDC with the FDA, and the NSF even have funded different parts of Odyssey to help us evolve. And so you'll see that usually represented through other medical centers like Tufts, Johns Hopkins, MIT, and University of Virginia. So we see academics being able to contribute their time as part of projects that they're doing for outside foundations or government. We see now services that companies provide services to help sites manage their data in a modified or help them run a network study. Last year, we saw a new company, evidently, that was supporting open source by helping sites run network studies. We know of several vendors that are helping sites omapify their data. And so this year, we brought in a new vendor that was working on Open Core, which builds off of the Odyssey open source and then provides some additional functionality for a different segment of our community. And then for a period of time that is provided as a commercial license, which eventually then becomes open source. We also had really good, we had James Green, and we had Wouter Frank from the Hive talking about how we can find ways to build consortia for multiple sites to invest in to add core beneficial features. So I still, we're still seeing a great partnership between academia and industry in Odyssey because it is open source, because it is transparent, and because this is really able to help address a common good. And so this has been exciting to see. So I also wanted to mention there's a couple areas that you can get involved with open source. And you'll see you're here for Martine next week, but he helps coordinate the Hades suite of projects in R and Python, the Health Analytics Data Evidence Suite, which meets monthly as well. And here is their page of all of their projects with their maintainers. And they've done a great job of diversifying and spreading out the load of the maintainers so that no one person is overwhelmed in the process. And they also have done a great job with their code coverage and their automated continuous integration processes. We also have the Atlas and Web API team that meets and are open to having new members join them. Anthony Senna and Chris Knoll have been doing a lot of efforts on, have been really investigating this year, as you saw earlier today with the survey about looking to getting some UI, UX design feedback on what people might want in a new generation of Atlas. And of course, we have the Technology Advisory Board. The Technology Advisory Board, if you don't know, is basically a group of our key repositories that are really meant to be deployed with each of our into each of our sites. And so they focus on security and stability and sustainability. We have cloud partners that host our software that provide us feedback, and we really try to look at how do we look at our ecosystem as one system? How do we connect the pieces together? How do we make sure that they work for our users at the site? And that is really, I encourage people to take a look at our Teams group. We have a great charter there, and we encourage folks to become more involved in it. Okay, so that was my opening statement. I wanted to hand it over to one of our key speakers on Friday, and that was Jared, who was talking about new ways of doing vocabulary management. Jared?
Awesome. Can you hear me? Awesome.
I can hear you just fine.
You can see my slides? All right. Let me just go into presentation mode. Sorry, I lost Teams for a second. Hopefully you can all still see this.
Yeah, I can see it. Thank you.
All right. So thanks so much for having me on the call today. If those of you who are at DevCon on Friday, this will be kind of a speed run of my talk there. I'll talk a little bit about the custom vocabulary builder, which is some work I've been doing while at Tufts to try to integrate mapping and validation processes that clinicians and ontology experts are performing with a OMOP-shaped vocabulary, specifically custom vocabulary tables, downstream that can be used for analytics. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jared, and I'm on the research faculty at Tufts. So a bit of background on the project. I used to work for a company called Eden's Health based in Belgium, and I worked a lot with Eden data partners, harmonizing their data into OMOP. And one of the things that came up across multiple projects was the need to capture custom concepts within OMOP. And so we built kind of this bespoke custom workflow, assign 2 billionaire IDs and reference those new custom concepts against the existing vocabularies. And we saw some pretty positive use out of this. We were able to kind of enable some research, which is exciting. But as I say in the bottom right here, it was relatively bespoke. There was no continuous integration, so this was all kind of done manually. We didn't really have good mechanisms in place for sharing the results or versioning what came out the other end. So building on that, we had a couple of use cases come up in the last couple of years that could make use of custom terminologies, and we wanted to address those limitations. And so what we have done is we have applied a kind of a data entry and validation platform upstream. So that's what you're seeing here on the left, where we have a Google Sheet that's collaborative, and clinicians can come in and validate mappings from a particular source concept to a target. And they do this in SESOM format, or simple standard for sharing ontology mappings. It's a kind of a relational structure for capturing metadata about mappings and validations thereof. And so we kind of created this data entry and validation platform, or used Google Sheets to effectively facilitate this. And then behind that Google Sheet, we created an app script, which is more or less a functional script that can be triggered on various events in your Google Sheets. In our case, we just set up like a regular frequency event that would essentially export the CSV data from that Google Sheet onto GitHub. So we then had this set of kind of structured CSV files in GitHub that we then ran through a broader process on actually a self-hosted runner that referenced a full-fledged OMOP vocab database with all of this logic to assign concept IDs and reference the existing vocabulary and deprecate old mappings and update mappings and all of the stuff that you hear the vocabulary team talking about before finally placing the delta, right? So everything that we've now needed to update with our custom vocabulary, be it the concepts themselves or any relationships that we've defined or ancestors, things like this, that delta gets shipped back onto GitHub. So this set of small files, not the full vocabulary that you get from Athena, but just what we have created, this custom bit, makes its way back into GitHub where it's version controlled and can be referenced and pulled and used. And so just again to highlight, we have kind of a data entry on the left. We have our continuous integration set up through a GitHub action and through some services on Azure. The actual ID assignment happens here in this builder section in the center, and then dissemination and version control is facilitated through GitHub yeah, effectively a public GitHub space. So I went into detail on each of these. I'll kind of just, again, this is an overview. So experts are kind of really going into a Google Sheet, which is a familiar environment. And we've also put some guardrails in place so they can't step on each other's toes, so to speak. So we've also written some app scripts to prevent, like to effectively assign users a row and block that row from anybody else being able to edit it except for the assignee. And once a code is validated, it also becomes locked. So things like that to prevent the issues you typically see in collaborative Google documents. And then this is kind of what an app script looks like, where we effectively load or use it to ship our data content onto GitHub. We then, once we are in GitHub, we have this set of essentially SQL scripts that get executed to upload those mappings into a database, reference them against the vocabulary, identify the differences, and kind of create a set of staging tables that ultimately get inserted pending or post validation into our kind of working vocabulary for the use case. So all of this is happening through a GitHub action, and it's happening in this case on Azure. And this is kind of what that looks like. Again, just a bash window here of a self-hosted GitHub runner that can interface with our private vocab server. So we have the Athena, the vocabularies that you download from Athena here, and this is just a simple Ubuntu machine that's sending these SQL queries back and forth and retrieving or making changes, let's say, in that database. And then finally, it sends off the Delta files back to our public GitHub repo, where you can just create a view then of your concept table in this case, which contains the full-fledged Athena vocab and then this Delta. And that's kind of your augmented custom concept view that can be used downstream or in ETLs or wherever you want to use it. Okay, one thing I do want to highlight on this is this mapping metadata table, which is a new addition or going to be a new addition to the vocabulary framework here, and that ultimately contains data about mapping provenance. So who mapped which code? What did they map it to? Is it still valid? Was it deprecated? When did it actually get mapped? What algorithm did they use? All of this information we're capturing in this mapping metadata table. And in this case, this gets updated every run on GitHub. So we actually have a historical view on that metadata as we progress with new versions and new mappings and updates. Where are we using this? So right now we're using this on a couple of work groups. So the GIS work group has a fairly mature implementation with, I want to say, over 10,000 custom concepts related to exposures to particular pollutants of interest, social determinants of health, things like that. We are also using it for psychiatry to capture particular prems and proms, survey instruments that are either custom or not yet represented in OMOP. Mimic 4 is undergoing a kind of a refresh in its ETL logic. Brian Gao is currently leading some of that effort to update the ETL and reference this kind of Delta vocabulary view on the Mimic custom concepts rather than this GCP table set that they had previously been using. So check that out if you're interested. And then I'm also a big part of the Chorus Bridge to AI Grand Data Challenge. This is kind of multi-site effort to aggregate data centrally related to critical care and specifically multimodal data. So if you see this and you're interested in checking it out or learning more, or you think that you have a use case that might need some custom vocabulary, and again, in this interim period before it can get officially pulled in through the kind of a standard release, please reach out. I'd be happy to talk about it with you. And one last thing before I stop here. So what I've talked about so far is essentially pulling in validated mappings and converting them into a OMOP-shaped set of vocabulary tables. But what we're currently working on, and we have kind of a provisional version of, is the upstream version of that. So actually suggesting potential mappings to reviewers that get fed into this SESOM-shaped Excel sheet that then feed the rest of the pipeline. So this kind of upstream suggestion-making workflow is something that currently we have in our private repository as part of the Bridge to AI consortium, and then we expect to roll out soon in the public CVB space that I've been referring to. So more to come there. Other next steps, working with the vocabulary team, templating, parameterizing, trying to make it as easy as possible to expand this to other use cases, looking at how people are actually using it. Does it scale? Can we make improvements in terms of what the kind of integration all looks like? And then effectively better validating the underlying builder logic and making sure that all edge cases, all relationships are being captured appropriately and according to the vocab conventions. So I, by no means the only person who has worked on this. There's a lot of other folks on this slide that have helped out and contributed in lots of different ways. So thank you to all of them and to all of you for listening, and a couple of quick links if you want to learn more about some of this work. So thanks so much. Hopefully I didn't go too far over, but
no, you're fine.
Thanks.
Jared, thank you so much. This is great work.
Thanks.
And so the next session we had was led by Katie, who led a developer dialogue, which really we took several of our most prolific developers that are on that we saw on GitHub over the past year, and we had a conversation with them about how things are changing with them and how they perform their tasks on Odyssey and what kind of gets them motivated. Katie, do you want to talk about your dialogue?
Sure thing. You can see my slide?
Yep.
Great. So hi, everybody. I'm Katie Sadowski. For those who don't know me, I'm on the real-world evidence analytics team at Boehringer Ingelheim, and I hosted this wonderful developer dialogue panel at the DevCon last week. So in the first half of DevCon, we heard from a bunch of folks about what software is being built in the Odyssey community. And then the focus of the developers dialogue was to chat with some Odyssey developers about how they develop open source software. We had 4 panelists from all across the ecosystem: Martin and Eyal on the analytics side, Edward from the OMOP vocabulary, and then Lawrence in ETL. And each of them talked a bit about the tools and workflows they're using to develop software and analytics for observational research. And they each shared a bit about their backgrounds as developers. Then we had some time for folks in the audience to ask questions. We had a really interesting discussion, and for today's recap, I just summarized some of my main takeaways. Number 1, we talked about the importance of following DevOps best practices in writing high-quality code more efficiently. This includes organizing and versioning our code in a standard way, automating tests on our code, and making sure we're running those tests from end to end, including the documentation we generate and the way that different software packages interact with each other. There's lots of cool examples of this in Odyssey. We've got the Ulysses package maintained by Martin, which helps you set up a standard study code repository. In patient level prediction, maintained by Eyal, there's some really cool testing and deployment features. You're going to hear more about that in a minute. And all across Hades, we've got a really robust package maintenance strategy. My takeaway here was that within Odyssey open source, we're starting to have a sort of meta standardization. So we don't just have standard data and standard software packages, but the workflows we use to standardize our data and the way we build that software are also standardized. Number 2, we of course talked about large language models, or LLMs. Our panelists are each using LLMs to varying degrees and for different purposes, but everyone was aligned on the need to be very targeted in the way that we use them to help generate code. The consensus seems to be that LLMs currently do best when they're operating in a structured environment, and that they can be very powerful for generating repetitive or boilerplate code, and especially documentation. There was naturally a lot of interest in this topic in the audience, and several people expressed interest in learning more about the Gen AI work group. So I figured I'd say again here, there is a generative AI working group in OHDSI, and I'm going to drop the link for that in the chat after I'm done speaking for anyone else who's interested. And then my last takeaway from the discussion was around how developers can find support for their open source work, both from within the OHDSI community and from their employers. Several panelists mentioned the importance of demonstrating the value of open source software to their employers in order to get their support to spend time contributing to projects like OHDSI. They described how this value comes from mainly two places. One, the transparency of open source software, especially in the research space. We all know how critical this is. And two is its long-term sustainability. So instead of being locked into some black box proprietary platform or having to build and maintain an in-house project from scratch, an open source user is tapping into an ecosystem whose boundaries stretch far beyond any one institution or vendor. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but I thought our panelists made some really nice points on this topic. I recommend checking out the video if you want to hear more. And then in terms of support from the community, we discussed some ideas around mentorship, prioritization, and access to data. These are all topics I think are going to be great to discuss at a future technical advisory board meeting. And then obviously we're always looking for new contributors. So if you're curious about getting involved, please reach out on Teams, file a GitHub issue in your favorite repo, or speak up on the next open source community call. We would love to hear from you. That's it for my recap. I'm going to turn it over now to Eyal to recap his panel presentation.
Thank you. And also, if anyone has any questions on the call, please add it in the chat. We'd love to. It was a great dialogue, and so we would love to hear if there's any questions anyone you have that we can address.
Thank you for the introduction, Katie. I hope everyone can see my screen. So I'm going to repeat the presentation I did at the last DevCon. It's going to be a short introduction of my open source journey in OHDSI, along with a demo where I develop a deep learning model in under 3 minutes. So my name is Eyal Fridgeirsson. I'm a postdoc at the Erasmus MC in Rotterdam, and I'm also the maintainer of the patient level prediction and deep patient level prediction HDSI packages. And yeah, and I co-maintain the PLP package, of course, with Jenna Revs. Where was I before OHDSI? So I was a Python guy. I didn't know much R. I had not worked collaboratively with others using Git, and I had never contributed to open source software. If I contrast that with where I am now, I would say I'm quite proficient in R, as well as a bunch of other languages. I'm working collaboratively with others almost every week. I'm maintaining 2 HDSI packages, and I'm contributed to multiple more. But how did I get there? So I'm lucky that I'm in a position in my day-to-day job as a researcher that I need to rely on OHDSI tools for my research, more specifically the patient level prediction package. And quickly after I was hired to do this research, I was introduced to Jenna Revs. This is an important collaborator of our department. And of course, I needed to start learning basic R. And one of the first things I did was to learn how to use the debugger. So I'm a scientist, so I need to trust the code that I'm running to produce evidence for my papers. So I needed to understand everything. So this means that in the beginning, I spent a lot of time stepping through most lines of code actually in HDSI and asking critical questions of the code. And since Jenna is a nice person, I felt also very comfortable with creating issues on GitHub for her. And because she is smart, she quickly asked me if I wanted to do a pull request to fix an issue. And that's how I started contributing to PLP. And today I am co-maintaining PLP with Jenna. So then I'm going to briefly mention some highlights here focused on the developer experience, since this was for the developers conference. So every time you commit a change of code, you need to run some tests. And when I started contributing to the PLP, the tests were taking too long of time for me. So one of the first things that I did was that I overhauled the tests, and I reduced the time from about 30 minutes to, well, almost 1 hour sometimes, down to 90 seconds today. Other things that we do in HDSI, for example, is that we have a standardized continuous integration pipeline. So every time we push code up to GitHub, there's a bunch of workflows that test our code on different operating systems. And one of the things that I've added on top of that is actually that I test on now all the hyperlinks in our documentations, because we were getting reports from users that the hyperlinks were dead, and I fixed all of that, but then I added automation so this would never happen again. And then we also publish Docker containers automatically. We just recently started doing this, and so every time we make a new release on GitHub, we publish Docker containers now, which is great for demoing, as you will see in a bit. And of course, last but not least, we got into CRAN, which is a central package repository for R, and this makes the packages much more accessible to all of our users. But in the interest of time, I think I'm going to jump straight to the demo. So I'm going to demo here. I'm going to run the latest container of the DPLP package. And then I'll run the Docker container, and that's running an RStudio server instance, which I can access from a browser. And I'm going to open up actually my RStudio session crashed, so I need to, well, on my laptop, so I need to get the code that I was going to paste in here. I'm still going to finish in 3 minutes though. So.
Heck, you have more time than you think.
Okay. That's fine. Okay, here it is. Sorry about that. So here is my code. This is just about 40 lines, and I'm just going to start running while I explain what's happening. So I have a development database in DocDB with 1 million patients that I've mapped into the container. So it's actually accessible from inside the container. In there, I have 2 cohorts. So I'm target and outcome cohort. So I'm predicting the risk of dementia in older patients after a healthcare encounter. I'm extracting features. So I'm extracting gender, age, and condition occurrence. And then I'm running the standard PLP pipeline. The time at risk, as I mentioned, is 5 years. And I'm developing a so-called default ResNet, which is a model in a deep patient level prediction package. And I'm doing it on my host GPU. So I'm also giving the container access to my GPU. And we can see it training here, and I can even check my GPU, and it's doing something. So I hope Teams doesn't crash. And now we're getting close to the end of the training, and as we can see, we should get the results soon. And here we are. So the test set performance is 78.5% AUC. Our predicted risk is 4%. Our average predicted risk for the test set, which is slightly higher than our observed risk. So this is a bit not that well calibrated model, but it's the best I could do in this time. And I wanted to also highlight one thing. The cohort size here, we're developing a model here on 112,000 people, which is almost a bit less than 1/3 of the country where I come from, Iceland. So with that, I want to thank you, and thank you for inviting me, and give it back to Paul.
Thank you, and thank you for doing a live demo twice now. That was very courageous of you. And so yeah, our Peter wasn't able to be here, but I wanted to share just a little bit about his work. And so let's see if I can share my slide. There we go. This is the link to the video that Peter gave on Friday. And in short, basically, his group Data for Life have put together a new repo, which is D2E. And what they've done is they've actually they've contributed a wrapper around several of OHDSI tools, from concept mapping into the ETL side, into cohort discovery, and the RStudio. They wanted to provide a common user interface around that and try to see how it could be integrated as as a seamless experience for users with interactive notebooks and RStudio environments. So I think this was it's an exciting project. It's worth taking a look at, and it's being really driven by their foundation behind Data for Life, which really has a very expansive mission around the more people using their software, the more impact they're making. And so that is really what their goals are to do. So it was really, it's exciting to have them introduced into our Odyssey community this year. And then from a final, I guess, thoughts perspective, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put in the chat. But we certainly were as developers, we're very cognizant of the changes going on in the clinical research community here in the US and its impact around the world. And so we certainly had some discussions around things we were doing, and most of them were about how grateful we are that we are an open source community, and that we're a partnership with industry and academia. We're not dependent upon one grant or one funding source, and we're also really focusing on the most efficient ways of modernizing EHR data to be able to create evidence. So I feel all the principles for why we are doing this really support us to be flexible and to be able to really state the case for the value that we're creating, and also be able to be as a collective, be able to continue to grow. And so it was a good year, and we're hopeful for another good year this year as well.